On October 13, 1307, at dawn, the Royal French Guards surrounded all Templar commanderies. King Philip V's orders were merciless: arrest every knight and confiscate every coin. Seize every document. But when the detachment reached the port of La Rochelle, the most important naval outpost of the order, they found only empty docks and silence. 18 war galleys disappeared into the night, along with the entire Templar fleet, their legendary treasures, and something so dangerous to the government that the Vatican remains silent about it to this day. Official history claims that the order was destroyed, that the last Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, burned at the stake in 1314, cursed the king and the pope, and that the Templars dissolved into oblivion, becoming only a legend of the Middle Ages. But historical documents tell a different story, a story of ships that crossed the Atlantic Ocean 2 centuries before Columbus, a story of maps that showed continents unknown to Europe, a story of knowledge so ancient and powerful that its possession cost the lives of thousands of people. In the underground vaults of the Vatican there are more than 50 kilometers of shelves with documents, most of them never seeing the light of day. Among them are stored testimony data. Under torture by the last Templars, they spoke of secret expeditions to the west, of lands beyond the edge of the known world, of maps found beneath Solomon's temple in Jerusalem, of maps dating back 1,000 years, of which the Inquisitors recorded these confessions and then destroyed them. But not all copies were destroyed, and they tell an impossible truth. On the coast of Nova Scotia, in rocks and caves, archaeologists are finding strange symbols, a Templar cross carved into stone in places where Europeans weren't supposed to be until the 15th century, and medieval swords buried according to the Christian rite, the ruins of stone buildings whose architecture is identical to the commandery of the order in France. Each find is systematically ignored by the academic community. Each study meets with strange resistance because recognizing these artifacts as authentic means admitting that everything we were told about the discovery of America was a lie. The vanished fleet of the Templars was not the escape of desperate people, it was a carefully planned operation prepared long before the arrest. They knew that they would be destroyed and they knew why. They hid the most valuable thing they had, not gold or relics, but the knowledge that the world was much larger and more ancient than the Church taught, knowledge that could destroy the Vatican's monopoly on truth, and they took this knowledge overseas to lands that official history would only discover 200 years later. Today we will tell their true story. Imagine waking up one morning and discovering that an entire fleet of warships has disappeared without a trace. Not one ship, not two. 18 fully equipped battleships capable of carrying hundreds of people and tons of cargo disappeared overnight without witnesses. Without an explanation. This is exactly what happened on October 13, 1307, in the port of La Rochelle on the Atlantic coast of France, and this disappearance changed the course of history in a way you can't even imagine. To understand the scale of this event, you need to understand who the Templars were. They were not ordinary monks. They were not ordinary warriors. They were the first multinational corporation in human history. Bankers to kings, owners of thousands of commanderies across Europe, owners of a fleet that could rival any maritime power of the time. In 2 centuries of existence, the order accumulated wealth that exceeded the treasury of any European kingdom. They owned lands from the Holy Land to Scotland. They controlled trade routes. They knew secrets that kings and popes could only dream of. But in 1307, everything changed. King Philip V of France was in despair. His treasury was empty after endless wars. He owed the Templars vast sums of money that he could never repay, and he knew about something. Something so important that it justified the destruction of the most powerful organization in Christendom. Philip was no fool. He did not act impulsively. He had been preparing this operation for months in absolute secrecy. The orders were sealed and delivered to royal officials throughout France with instructions not to open them until a certain date. When Friday, October 13th, arrived, all of France simultaneously descended on the Templar order. Now, think about this carefully. Imagine that. You are the commander of an elite military unit, you are tasked with arresting the most dangerous warriors of their time, men who have been through the Crusades, who fought the Saracens in the deserts of the Holy Land, who know every secret of warfare, and when you arrive at their main port, you find emptiness, absolute emptiness. The docks are empty, the warehouses are empty, the treasury has disappeared, the ships are gone, the documentation is burned, as if they knew, as if someone warned them in advance. But who? 3. The official chronicles of the time are minimal to the point of absurdity. Royal records mention the confiscation of Templar property, arrests and interrogations, and the fleet is silent, deafening silence. Not a single document describes what happened to the 18 galleys. Not a single record records their direction. Not a single witness was questioned about where they went. This is not an accident. This is the systematic destruction of information. Someone very powerful wanted this story buried forever. Let's look at the numbers, because numbers don't lie. 18 war galleys, each capable of carrying a crew from 100 to 150 people. This means from 1,800 to 2,700 people could have left on these ships. Add to this the cargo. Each galley could carry up to 50 tons of cargo. Multiply this by 18 ships, 900 tons. 900 tons of gold, silver, documents, artifacts, weapons. This is not an escape, but a mass evacuation planned with military precision. But what is truly disturbing is that a week before the arrest, the Templar commanders throughout France began to behave strangely. Witnesses reported night convoys moving toward the coast, and wagons heavily laden with unknown cargo, about knights in traveling cloaks concealing their affiliation with the order. One Norman chronicler recorded seeing a column of 20 wagons moving towards Porto at night. When he asked the locals what was going on, they were met with silence and fear. People were afraid to even talk about it. Imagine the logistics of this operation. You can't just take 18 ships and disappear. You need water supplies, provisions for months, navigation instruments, maps, crews that know where they are going. It takes weeks, if not months, of planning. This means that the Templars knew about the impending disaster long before Philip gave the order, as they learned the order had the most sophisticated spy network in medieval Europe. They had agents at every royal court. They intercepted messages. They bribed officials. They knew about Philip's plans perhaps earlier than some of his own advisors. 3. But there is something else that the official history is desperately trying to ignore. A year before the arrests in 1306, the Grand Master of the Order Jacques de Molay returned from Cyprus to Paris. Officially he came to meet with the Pope Clement V, but there is a record that before his departure, he sent coded messages to the order's key commanderies. Messages that were destroyed immediately after reading. What was in these messages? What information did they contain? We will never know because all copies were burned. Now let's talk about the port of La Rochelle itself. It wasn't an ordinary port. It was the Templars' main naval base on the Atlantic coast. From here, the order controlled the salt trade, one of the most valuable commodities in the Middle Ages. From here, they sent ships to England, Spain, Portugal, and, most importantly, from here they had direct access to the open ocean, not the Mediterranean Sea, which patrolled. Dozens of fleets sailed across the open Atlantic Ocean, where a ship could disappear without a trace. When the king's soldiers arrived in La Rochelle on the morning of October 13th, they found the port facilities in perfect order. The warehouses were locked, the loading mechanisms were in place. But there wasn't a single sack of grain, a single barrel of wine, a single coin in the chests. Everything had been evacuated with surgical precision. Even the port records that were supposed to document every arrival and departure of ships were gone. Pages had been torn from journals. Entire books were missing. One of the royal officials, a man named Guillaume d'Ingery, Philip's chief advisor, wrote something astonishing in his report to the king. He wrote that when they searched the port commander's residence, they found a map, an unusual map of trade routes, a map that showed lands far to the west, beyond the known world. This map was immediately confiscated and sent to the king. After that, it was never mentioned again in official documents. but a copy of the description of this map survived in the private notes of one of the assistants' body, and this description speaks of lands that Europe would not officially know for another 200 years. Think about it: 18 ships, 2,000 men, 900 tons of cargo, a map of unknown lands. All of this disappears overnight and no one asks questions, no one sends ships in pursuit. The King of France, the most powerful monarch in Europe, the man who just defeated the Templar Order, just lets their fleet escape. This doesn't make sense unless he knew where they were going and unless he realized that sending a pursuit would be futile. In the following years, rumors began to appear, rumors of Templar ships spotted off the coast of Scotland, knights in white cloaks with red crosses landing in Portugal, of mysterious men speaking strange French appearing in remote Atlantic ports. Every time local authorities tried to detain them, these people disappeared, as if they knew every bay, every island, every safe haven on the coast. But the most interesting thing began later, in the 14th century. In the 15th century, when European explorers began sailing the Atlantic Ocean, they made strange discoveries. Portuguese sailors found ruins of European-style stone buildings on islands off the African coast. Danish fishermen reported encounters with ships of unknown design carrying sails with a red cross. The Icelandic sagas mention people in iron armor arriving from the south long before the Viking Age. You might think this is all a coincidence, that these are legends, that there is no real evidence, but there is evidence. It was simply systematically ignored. In 1937, French historian Louis Charpin published research on the Templar holdings in Rochelle. He discovered documents in municipal archives dated 1305 that mentioned expenses for provisions for long voyages, which required supplies for 6 months. 6 months! Where do you sail from France if you need 6 months of supplies? The official story says that the Templar fleet dissolved, that the ships were sold, that the people dispersed across Europe, but the numbers don't add up. You don't sell 18 war galleys, you don't hide such a fleet, 2,000 people in villages and towns. Someone would have noticed, well, someone would have told about it. The royal spies were everywhere. No, the fleet didn't disperse, it went far away, where no one could follow, where maps hadn't yet been officially introduced, where it was possible to start over. Far from the persecution of the Vatican and the greed of kings. And here's the final piece of this puzzle. 10 years after the fleet's disappearance, in 1317, the Scottish King Robert the Bruce won a decisive victory over the English army at the Battle of Brackenbury. The chronicle of this battle mentions the appearance of mysterious knights who attacked the English from the flanks at a critical moment. Knights in white cloaks. Knights who did not belong to any known Scottish clan after the battle. These knights disappeared, and Robert the Bruce, a man who had previously shown little interest in maritime affairs, suddenly began building a fleet that included ships of distinctly Mediterranean design. 18 galleys disappeared on October 13, 1307. Their disappearance was not the end of the story, it was the beginning. A mystery that stretches across a century, the beginning of a trail that leads from the ports of France across the stormy waters of the Atlantic to shores that officially did not yet exist on maps of Europe, and someone very influential spent 700 years ensuring that this story remained hidden. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Templar created something impossible. A map of the world that should not exist, a map that showed the coastline of South America with an accuracy that European cartographers would not achieve for another 300 years. A map that depicts Antarctica without ice cover. A continent that wouldn't be officially discovered until 1820. This map rewrites everything you thought you knew about the Age of Discovery. And the most frightening thing is that Templar wrote in the margins of this map where he got his information. He used ancient maps, maps that were centuries old. Maps that shouldn't have existed. Imagine you're a Turkish admiral at the beginning of the 16th century. The Ottoman Empire is at the height of its power. You command a fleet that controls the Mediterranean Sea. You have access to the best cartographers of your time, but you know something others don't. The libraries of Constantinople, captured by the Turks 60 years ago, contain documents, old maps that came there from Venice, Genoa, and the private collections of crusaders. And among these maps, there's something special, maps that show the world in a way medieval sailors weren't supposed to know. Samporis did not hide his sources. This is what makes his map even more shocking. He wrote directly on the map that he used about 20 ancient maps in portolans. Among them were maps dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Maps that supposedly showed the entire inhabited world. But here comes the most interesting part. One of the maps he mentions belonged to a Genoese sailor, a sailor who sailed to the west. A sailor who possibly participated in expeditions that official history prefers to remain silent about. And there is evidence that this Genoese had connections with the Templars. Now let's look at the map itself carefully. The coastline of South America is depicted with details that correspond to modern satellite measurements. The mouths of rivers are in the right places. Mountain ranges are indicated where they actually are. The islands off the coast are shown with amazing accuracy. But Columbus discovered America. In 1492, just 21 years before the creation of Samporis' map, in 21 years, Europeans had barely managed to explore the Caribbean islands and a small part of the coast. They did not know the true extent of the continent. They did not know the geography of South America. Then where did it come from? This information is on the map. In 1929, the Peri Reis map was discovered in the archives of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. A Turkish historian named Halil Eden found it by chance among hundreds of other documents. When he unfolded it, he could not believe his eyes. The map was drawn on gazelle skin, richly decorated, and contained detailed images of not only geographical features but also exotic animals, ships, and even portraits of rulers. But the most shocking thing was what the map itself showed. Eden immediately realized that he was holding something in his hands that called into question the entire official history of geographical discoveries. When the map was published, the academic community reacted predictably. Most historians simply ignored it. Those who could not ignore it tried to explain the accuracy of the map by happy coincidences, saying that Peri Reis may have had access to maps by Spanish and Portuguese explorers, that he simply copied contemporary information. But this explanation collapses upon detailed analysis because the map contains details that the Spanish and Portuguese did not know in 1513, details of which they will not recognize yet. For 100 years, the most scandalous part of the map has been at the bottom, where Antarctica should be. The Peri map depicts a coastline that corresponds to the coastline of Antarctica, but not the Antarctica we know today, covered in kilometers of ice. No, this is the coastline of a continent without ice cover. In 1959, American professor Charles Hapgood conducted a detailed study of this part of the map and compared it with seismic data obtained from studying the subglacial relief of Antarctica. The results were stunning. The map accurately showed mountains and valleys that are under the ice, mountains and valleys whose existence we only learned about thanks to modern technology. Think about what this means. Antarctica has been covered in ice for the last 6,000 years. This means that the map Peri Reis used as a source was created before the continent froze, 6,000 years ago. Who created this map? What civilization possessed the technology to map an entire continent in such ancient times? And most importantly, how did this map end up in the hands of medieval sailors? How did it end up in the hands of the Templars? There are documents that link the Templars to ancient maps. In the Vatican archives, in those 50 kilometers of sealed shelves, are stored the testimony of Templars given under torture during interrogations by the Inquisition. Some of this testimony was made public in the 19th century when the Vatican partially opened access to its archives. In one of the documents, a knight named Geoffrey Frundishani, one of the last commanders of the order, speaks of maps found on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, maps that showed a world far beyond the known lands. Maps that the order kept in the strictest secrecy. Now let's go back to 1307, the Lost Fleet, the 18 galleys that sailed into the unknown. What if they weren't just fleeing? What if they had a specific goal? What if they had maps showing the way across the Atlantic? Maps that showed islands for resupply? Maps that showed currents and winds? Maps created by a civilization that knew the world better than we thought possible. In 1973, a Brazilian historian discovered a copy of a letter dated 1546 in the archives of Rio de Janeiro. The letter was written by a Portuguese Jesuit who was traveling along the coast of Brazil. In the letter, he describes meeting local residents who told him a strange story. They spoke of white men in iron armor who arrived on large ships long before. Portuguese, these people built stone buildings and lived among them for several generations, then they disappeared. Going deep into the continent, the Jesuit wrote down this story as a curiosity without attaching much importance to it. But he mentioned one interesting fact: the locals showed him the symbol that these white people used, the symbol of the Red Cross. The connection between the Piri-Reis map and the Templars becomes even more obvious when we look at the trade routes of the order. The Templars controlled ports throughout the Mediterranean. They had a commandery in Cyprus, from where Constantinople was a stone's throw. After the fall of Acre in 1291, many Templars evacuated to Cyprus, taking with them everything they could carry, including documents, including maps. When Constantinople fell in 1453, many Christian libraries were looted. The documents were distributed among themselves. Some fell into the hands of Turkish scholars such as Piri-Reis. But there is another connection, more direct, more frightening. In 1987, a French researcher gained access to a private collection in Portugal. The collection belonged to the descendants of a family that in the Middle Ages was associated with the Order of Christ, a Portuguese military order founded by former Knights Templar after their order's dissolution. In this collection, he found a portolan chart dating to the early 14th century that showed the Atlantic coast of Africa with details that weren't officially known until the late 15th century. But the most interesting thing was, on the reverse side, there was an inscription in Latin that read, "From the temple to the end of the world, the map of the guardians." Imagine you're a medieval knight, spending years in the Holy Land, digging beneath the Temple Mount, and you find a library. March 23rd. An ancient library hidden there centuries ago. In this library, maps of the world as it was 1,000 years ago, maps that show continents the existence of which your world does not even suspect. What do you do with this knowledge? Do you share it with the world? No, because this knowledge gives you power, a power that the church cannot control, a power that makes you independent of kings and popes. The Piri-Reis map is not just a geographical document, it is proof that someone knew about the New World. Long before Columbus, someone had maps that showed the way. Someone crossed the Atlantic Ocean when official history says that it was impossible, and this someone left traces in the form of maps that were copied from centuries to centuries, traces in the form of stories about people in iron armor on distant shores, traces in the form of stone buildings and symbols that should not have been there. The Turkish admiral did not understand the true importance of the map he created. For him, it was simply a navigational tool, a way to show off his knowledge of geography, but he preserved something priceless for history. He preserved evidence that the history of geographical discoveries taught in schools is incomplete. That there were others who sailed into the unknown before, who knew the secrets that would be officially revealed centuries later, and the most important candidates for the role of these discoverers: the disappeared Templars, whose fleet disappeared into the night, taking with them the knowledge of the ancients. 3. On the east coast of modern-day Canada, in a province called Nova Scotia, there is a place that official history ignores. A place where archaeologists find medieval European artifacts and layers dating back to the 14th century, 150 years before Columbus set foot on the shores of the New World. Among these artifacts are swords, fragments of armor, coins, and most importantly, symbols, the Red Cross symbols carved into the rocks. Symbols that leave no doubt about who was here. The Templars reached America, and they didn't just visit these shores, they stayed. Let's start with geography, because geography explains a lot. Nova Scotia is located at the same latitude as northern France, The climate is similar, the forests are similar. For people fleeing Europe it would be an ideal place, but there is something even more important: sea currents. There is a current that runs from the coast of France past Ireland past Iceland and then down the coast of Greenland all the way to Nova Scotia. The Vikings knew about this. They used it to reach Vinland 500 years before Columbus, and the Templars, with their advanced navigational knowledge, must have known about it too. In 1952, a group of archaeologists began excavating a hill near a village called Westford in Massachusetts. They were looking for traces of early colonial settlements. Instead, they found something that changed their understanding of history. On a smooth rock surface, they discovered an image of a medieval knight in full armor next to him. A sword and shield on the shield was a symbol, a clear and unmistakable symbol of the Red Cross of the Templars. Geological analysis showed that the carving was made in the 14th century. This was impossible, but it was real. The official reaction was predictable. The academic community declared the find a fake. They said that some prankster had carved this image in the 19th century. It could not be real because it contradicted established history, but geologists did not. They agreed. They conducted a detailed erosion analysis, studied the patina, the natural coating that forms on stone over time. Their verdict was unambiguous: the carving was made at least 600 years ago. Perhaps even earlier, someone carved the image of a Templar knight on a rock in North America in the 14th century, but Westworth is just the beginning. In New Scotland itself, on a peninsula called Oak Island, there is one of America's greatest archaeological mysteries, the Money Pit, a shaft dug to a depth of more than 50 m with a system of tunnels, traps, and defense mechanisms that boggle the imagination. Treasure diggers have been trying to reach its bottom for more than 200 years. Many have died in the attempt, and what they find are fragments of medieval chain armor, pieces of parchment with Latin inscriptions, and at a depth of 30 m, a stone slab with an inscription in an unknown language. The inscription, when deciphered, read, 40 feet below lie 2 million pounds. Think about the logistics of creating such a structure. It's not just a pit. This engineering marvel of a mine has a flooding system that automatically fills it with seawater if someone digs too deep. The tunnels are connected to the ocean through underground channels. There are wooden platforms at different levels built from European oak, an oak that does not grow in North America. Radiocarbon dating has shown that some of these wooden structures date back to the early 14th century. Who could have built it? Who had the engineering knowledge, resources, and motivation to hide something so valuable? In 1967, a local farmer was plowing fields near the town of Fairfield, Nova Scotia. His plow hit something hard. When he dug up the object, he discovered a stone slab with text carved into it. The text was in medieval Latin mixed with runic symbols. After years of study, linguists have concluded that the inscription dates back to the 14th century and contains names that were common among the Knights Templar. One of the names was Henry Sinclair, a man who, according to Scottish chronicles, was a Knight of the Order and made a voyage across the Atlantic in 1398. Henry Sinclair was no ordinary knight. He was the Earl of the Orkney Islands, a group of islands north of Scotland. These islands were strategically important. They controlled the sea routes between Norway and Scotland, and, what's especially interesting, the Orkney Islands were one of the few places in Europe where the Templars found refuge after the dissolution of the order. Scotland was excommunicated in the early 14th century. Papal bulls had no force there, and it was there that many knights fled after their defeat in France. There are Scottish documents that mention a large expedition organized by Henry Sinclair in 1398. The official expedition was sent to explore new fishing grounds in the North Atlantic, but the fleet consisted of 12 ships. 12 ships is not a fishing expedition, it is a military operation.